If you get into a fixed work-rest ratio recovery and you start to get overwhelmed, either because the weight's too heavy or you've done too many reps or it's just cumulative overload, then the quality of the work will suffer and you're not getting the stimulus and response relationship that you're actually going for. So everything suffers because of it.
You have found your way to the Lemanne and Gordon podcast, where docs talk shop. Happy eavesdropping.
I'm Dr. Dawn Lemanne. I treat cancer patients.
I'm Dr. Deborah Gordon. I work with aging patients.
We've been in practice a long time.
A very long time.
We learn so much talking to each other.
We do. What if we let people listen in? In today's episode, we welcome back a familiar and popular guest, Andy Baxter, who has an impressive resume as rower, rowing coach, and particularly insightful rehabilitation specialist. He has 2 fitness centers locally with several unique features, which we'll hear a little bit more about today. But what Dr. Lemanne and I have particularly appreciated about his work is his focus on not just rehabbing an injury, but going beyond rehab, safely building both strength and resilience, good for avoiding both dementia and cancer. Let's hear about his exciting new techniques at achieving those goals. I recorded with Dr. Bredesen yesterday, and one of the things we moved in and out of was talking about the role of exercise in preventing and reversing dementia. So it's great, of course, that we have our exercise special guest on the podcast today. Andy, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And I want to welcome you too. This is Dr. Lemanne. I know that my audience very much, our audience, understands that exercise is one of the most important things you can do to prevent cancer, one of the most important things you can do if you have cancer to get well. So yes, so happy to have you.
So for, assuming that our audience grows by leaps and bounds every episode, some people may not have heard your bio before, which is pretty impressive, and we could spend the whole hour on that. But could you just give us a Cliff Notes version, as they used to say in the old days?
And it's because we're really proud of your bio. We have an Olympic athlete here with us.
Right. kind of.
Definitely.
So I guess my title would be medical exercise specialist. That's sort of my the day-to-day trappings of what I do. So I work predominantly with the senior population. Started originally in joint replacement specialties and then got into more of the neural protocols where exercise as medicine is what we preach. But I'm also a coach and former athlete, and so I'm kind of interested in all things fitness, but more specifically the fitness as medicine model and fitness for longevity's sake and the science behind that.
I was looking at some pertinent exercise for older people, and do you know they start considering having age-related losses and needing to make age-related interventions starting in their 40s.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, so you've just expanded our audience that
way. Right,
That's
exactly.
The way you've done it now. So all of you who are 40, you're now old.
Right. Yeah, that's really true. I mean, that's expanded my audience to 45. It's kind of where we're starting now, where we used to start at 55.
Yeah.
So that's quite relevant.
Uh-huh. So, I think any of the audience that's paid attention to the brain stuff knows that, yes, you encourage aerobic just like the New York Times encourages aerobic activity and, some intervals. But the resistance part of it is what's new for a lot of older people. And I think you have some interesting new insights about that. Yeah,
absolutely. So, and this is quite the deep dive here. So we'll just jump in and see where it takes us. But I wanted to start with a conversation that we had, Deborah, about hypertrophy and hypertrophy or muscle growth as combatant to sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass as we age. And so we had talked a bit about strength versus hypertrophy in and of itself. And what I mean by that is that there is a type of hypertrophy sort of affiliated with bodybuilding style muscle building processes that cause muscles to grow, but don't necessarily cause muscles to become stronger. And that's called sarcoplasmic.
That's kind of a waste.
It is kind of a waste, unless you're a bodybuilder, and then it's great because that's what you're going for. But as an athletic coach and certainly as a functional trainer for seniors, we want to build stronger, more powerful people, not dependent on muscle size necessarily, but muscle density and function. And that also has a place for hypertrophy, and that's called myofibrillar hypertrophy, where the actual fibers are increasing in density and size relative to strength, or strength relative to size, not just size for size's sake.
So we have myofibrillar, and the first one is
sarcoplasmic.
Sarcoplasmic.
Yeah.
Sarcoplasmic
hypertrophy. Yeah, and that's basically fluid, right? So you're just
okay.
It's sort of a cellular inflammatory response.
Is that what you get when you take creatine?
No.
Okay.
No, this is no. So this gets into concentric versus eccentric contractions, right? So a concentric muscle contraction is where we're shortening the muscle under a load, and the eccentric contraction is where we're lengthening the muscle under a load. And this is where the meat of this conversation kind of kicks
intended.
off. Yeah, right. Exactly. Because bodybuilding style workouts, higher rep workouts where there is a focus on the eccentric phase to induce hypertrophy creates inflammatory responses. There's microtrauma in the fibers. And in some cases, that's a good thing because we have to adapt to that and the muscles grow as they're repairing the damage.
I was going to quote back to you this advice I got from a trainer I was working with a couple years ago in winter rowing workouts. You might know him. His name is Andy Baxter, who was telling us all that, if doing a bench press with 50 pounds, we just couldn't take it up past that as long as we went down, let the weight down really slowly, we were going to get extra bang for our buck.
Now, for our audience, this is a different Andy Baxter, right? We have
that was my stunt double.
Our last podcast, we had two Deborah Gordons. This time we have two Andy Baxters, at least, that we're talking about.
Well, so let me clear that up. It's a really good point. And in fact, there's a whole medical protocol for that style of work that I actually was involved in the ground floor of that years ago. And that is controlling the tempo of the work to create a higher quality of work with less weight. So in rehab environments, that's a much safer way to do it. And so an example of that would be like a 4-second concentric with a 7-second eccentric. So you're spending more time on the eccentric phase, and that allows you to work with smaller weights at a higher quality or intensity. So that does have its place for sure.
Okay.
But what we're getting into is how do we get basically a clean anabolic signal from the muscle to the brain without any inflammatory reaction. And how also do we get this increased myofibrillar hypertrophy, which is the best kind, without an inflammatory response? And the answer is we need to isolate the concentric phase of those movements. And so the two best ways to do that are through A, high-intensity interval training, and B, very heavy weightlifting. When we say very heavy, we mean, in the 1 to 5 rep range. Potentially, when we get into power and power endurance, we get up into the 5 to 8 rep range, but certainly nothing higher than that. Okay? So now here's the problem. The problem with both of those modalities is that there is the potential for A, volatility, and B, a steep learning curve that most folks simply aren't going to want to get involved with.
And they seem completely different. So I think you have to give us a little bit of info on each one, the high-intensity intervals and the...
Yeah. So high-intensity interval training can be anything where you're doing, just a simple example would be a 3-to-1 rest-to-work ratio. So let's say you're going to go as hard as you can for 15 seconds, and then you're going to go easy for 45 seconds. Okay? And that's typically in the aerobic realm. Now, it can be strength endurance as well, so you can do weight training versions of that also. But the problem is that usually that becomes sort of volatile. There can be a concussive component if you're jumping around. There could be stress on the joints if you're moving free weights. And then even some aerobic, even sprints involve some orthopedic potential red flags for the aging population.
Can you, before we go too far into that, can you give us an example of what a weightlifting or resistance training HIIT session might look like? Hard 15 seconds, 45 seconds off.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned doing what? What are you doing in that 15 seconds?
Well,
walk us through that.
That's the problem. The problem is to do that effectively and safely, there's very few solutions out there. Now, there is power. So when we get into power, we're dealing with strength times speed, right? So load times speed. We take a load, we accelerate that load, which is actually functionally more relevant to an aging population than just strength for strength's sake. Strength in a vacuum isn't all that practical, but if we can take a load and accelerate it and make it dynamic, that's much more functional.
Well, let's take me for a second. So I'm 71 and I have a set of dumbbells at home, and kind of my favorite denomination is at the moment is either 10 pounds or 15 pounds. And I can do some things with my arms, overhead presses, bench presses, various things without hurting myself, I think, with those. How would I be able to do? Am I in good enough shape to do an HIIT, hard 15 seconds on, 45 seconds off? And what would that look like?
Sure.
What would I be actually physically doing in front of you? If I did that?
let's take an Olympic style movement. Let's say a clean, where you're going to take a weight, and you can mimic this with a dumbbell. So let's say you take your 15-pound dumbbells and you get into a deadlift position where the dumbbells are maybe 3/4 of the way down your shin, right? Because that's going to mimic a bumper plate in an Olympic bar. Then you're going to accelerate upward and lift that weight until you catch it at shoulder height.
Sure.
Okay, so that's a power movement. You're taking a load and accelerating that load. Okay?
Got it.
And that's the drive phase, so that's the concentric phase. So you're shortening muscles as you do that. So if you were to take that load and move it as fast as possible for 15 seconds, then you're probably going to net somewhere around 7 to 8 repetitions.
Got it.
In a 15-second period.
Okay.
Now, here's the problem. The problem is that every time you do one of those repetitions, you've got to lower that weight.
No, as Dawn pointed out, she could just drop it.
You could. And that's typically what you would do to safely do a concentric power workout. And that's what Olympic lifters do. They lift the weight and then they drop the weight because they don't want to deal with the eccentric load for a number of reasons. One is it saps your energy and takes away from the quality of the work, and the work is the concentric drive. But the other is that eccentric, trying to control an eccentric movement is going to induce a chemically inflammatory response. And that's going to prolong your recovery time. It's going to produce inflammation systemically throughout the body, including the brain. And it's generally not a great thing. Okay? Because, again, we want to find a weight that you're going to accelerate basically in a way that you would be exhausted by that 15 seconds, if not before, maybe 12 seconds, you might be completely done.
And just using the concentric contraction
part
of things. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So,
and then I take 45. I've done my 15 seconds, gotten 7 or 8.
And then you would rest for 45 seconds. Okay. Correct.
And then how many times would I repeat that?
Well, so if you're doing it purely concentrically, you would do that 4 times. And then you would, we use a protocol, which is a motor unit recruitment for the first 2 sets, and then what's called rate coding. And what that means, very simply, is that the first 2 sets are going to be to maximize motor unit recruitment and neural adaptation. So we want it nice and heavy. And then the second 2 sets, we're going to have that weight and then have that weight again so that it's getting lighter. Why will we do that? Because we want to accelerate faster. And when we do that, we increase what's called rate coding, which is how quickly a muscle fiber activates.
Okay.
And if we can do this concentrically, what we're doing is creating a clean anabolic signal from the muscles to the brain. And this is the really cool part. This is where we get into what are called myokines. And myokines are basically messengers within the endocrine system and the paracrine system. So long distance travel throughout the body or short localized distance from wherever the muscle that's activating. And all of these myokines are elicited specifically from muscle contractions, and most specifically from concentric muscle contractions. And so this is really important because myokines have the unique ability to pass through the blood-brain barrier. And they do this in a clean signal environment so that they actually reduce neuroinflammation. So when we can get a clean path to generate this conversation using myokines as our messengers within the endocrine system, it actually has really wonderful effects on the brain. And at the same time, it doesn't have negative effects on the brain, which other cytokines do.
So it has more powerful, I think people who care about brain health know about the BDNF messenger. So,
and that is a myokine.
Okay, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which, little side point, one of the things that I like that induces brain-derived neurotropic factor is chewing a good steak. Steak better than most things, don't you think, Dr. Lemanne?
I do, and it's not the chewing, though, is it?
No, it is the chewing.
Oh, the chewing.
No,
so
the chewing.
You could chew on a piece of wood, then.
You could chew on a piece of wood, and that it is one of the, it's interesting about chewing because there you are exerting pressure, and you don't have to. It's no work you don't have to drop the weight. You just open your mouth.
It's concentric only. Yeah.
And it is a muscular activity that a lot of people lose with age for a variety of reasons. Nobody's cooking them a steak anymore. They've lost some teeth in the back. They have gum disease.
Well, there's research showing that if you chew gum while you're studying, I found this out when I was a college student, chewing gum while you're studying actually improves your recall. And I don't think we knew why back then.
Before we go on, may I ask you a quick favor? Hit the subscribe button. Your hitting that subscribe button really, really matters. You're making sure cutting-edge ideas that matter to you move to the center of medical discourse, where they belong. Thank you. But maybe it's brain-derived neurotropic factor. Interesting. Okay, well, that was a little...
That was an aside,
wasn't it? That was
it?
a big detour, but myokines, so they're essentially hormones. They're proteins that are made in one place that act in another place in the body.
Yeah.
They're made in the muscle, and they're only made from concentric exercise, or they're more made?
More made in concentric than eccentric. But the key differentiator there, again, is that they're made without any inflammatory dirt in the signal.
Yeah. That's enticing. Yeah,
Yeah.
And do people know if they're getting inflammatory dirt in their signal? That's such...
I think that some of the psychology papers that I've read talk about, neuroinflammation in terms of cognition, thought processing, memory. So yeah, in the day-to-day, you could actually notice either the degrading effects or the positive effects when it's not present in terms of clarity and memory retention and problem-solving abilities.
And maybe even mood, yeah.
And definitely mood. Yeah, that's included.
So Andy, you mentioned that you can isolate two aspects, and one of them was the high intensity. What was the other one?
So high intensity interval training, concentric only, which examples of that might be cycling, for instance. That's a concentric only movement when you pedal a bicycle. Swimming, that's concentric only. Rowing, of course.
Isn't rowing the best exercise for all these things you're talking about?
It is, but the barriers to entry there is that you got to get on the water, you got to join a rowing club. Mm-hmm. Not everybody can do that. So so that becomes part of this issue. Part of my life mission here is to find a solution that could be accessible to everybody.
Well, now wait a minute. Mm-hmm. There's concept 2 for those of us who don't go on the water.
Yeah.
Or in the water.
Is that how we say it? See, I don't. Yeah,
no. I'm just.
I
do believe at one point you went in the water.
I did several times in my rowing career. Went straight in the water. Had to be pulled out. Yeah.
Wait, was that after you trained on a concept 2? There might be a connection.
Could be, huh?
Yeah. So concept 2 ergometers. That's a machine just like a bike machine where the ergometry or the measurement of power and output is in the rowing form, which is concentric only. True. Some of the problems with the concept 2 is that because it has a flywheel and the flywheel has weight, and once it starts moving, it creates its own kinetic energy, is that you're not getting a consistent load throughout the movement. And so the second problem there is that there's slip at the catch, which induces over time chronic overuse injuries like epicondylitis and shoulder issues and back issues.
So slip at the catch for our audience is what? When you're lifting the paddles or oars? If you don't even know which, whether it's paddles or oars out of the water?
Yeah, so when you're on a Concept 2 ergometer, or a rowing machine, and you initiate the drive phase, you start applying pressure on that handle, there's some slip in the clutch mechanism, right? And if you've never rowed outside of just using a Concept 2, then you probably don't know that because your brain's adapted to it. But the way that the brain adapts to it typically breaks some of the kinetic chain, usually at the elbow or the shoulder or the spine. So you can get injuries from that.
Okay.
But can I ask you, speaking as a rower, so, we're taught we approach that putting the blade into the water by slowing things down. And I do that on the erg too. Mm-hmm. I come away fast and move up, and then I kind of wait to engage my force until I can feel there's no slippage. Am I overcoming that by what I've learned from being on the water?
Actually the answer is no, because in the water, if you have a good catch, then you're directly locked on.
Right.
Right. But when you start the drive on the erg,
right,
you're going to get that slip once you apply the pressure, not before.
Okay.
Well, no, I want to bring us back to the two methods. So I'm not sure make sure I'm understanding this, Andy. So there's the HIIT, and the other one is
heavy weightlifting.
Weightlifting.
And preferably explosive weightlifting.
Okay.
So with a speed component, and with the speed component, then we're talking about power. Now, there is another misnomer that we should get out of the way right there, because powerlifting, the term powerlifting, is actually completely inaccurate. Powerlifters are actually strength athletes, and weightlifters are Olympic athletes. And so weightlifting technically are the Olympic movements like clean and press, the snatch, the clean and jerk, where you're taking very heavy loads and you're accelerating those loads. Powerlifters actually do very short movements that don't have a speed component, and that would be bench press, deadlift, and squat.
Squat.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a misnomer there, but
okay. So just for our audience, there are two different weightlifting sports that Andy's talking about here. And Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but powerlifting is a combination of three different lifts: bench press, squat, and what was the third one? Deadlift. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Whereas Olympic weightlifting is a very different animal.
It is.
Why don't you, Andy, describe a few of the lifts for Olympic weightlifting so that our audience knows that there's a big difference here.
Yeah, so Olympic weightlifting is very technical. It's very complicated because it's multi-joint movement, and it's a sequence of movements that have to be performed perfectly. And of course, you have to do this under very heavy loads. But the concept of power, being a load-speed equation, is that you're lifting a weight that without acceleration, you simply wouldn't be able to lift. So you have to have that acceleration component in order to complete that movement.
So Olympic weightlifters are using their legs to get barbells into various high positions at their collarbone, over their head, et cetera.
They're using their entire bodies to accelerate a weight. Yeah.
Whereas a power lifter is just using...
They're just using pure strength at a very low rate over a very short distance.
And if they tried, so you just, of course, you named all the weightlifting I do in my garage, my bench press, my deadlift. I mean, could somebody incorporate acceleration even to a shorter movement?
Yes, they absolutely can.
And that would be a good idea.
It would be a good idea. In fact, there's some simple ways to change up your weightlifting routine. Pausing at the bottom of the movement, for instance, and then accelerating up. That's a common rowing modality. So like if you were doing a bench press, coming down fairly slow and controlled to the point of contact at the chest, and then just pausing briefly and then accelerating out of that movement.
In kind of a thunderbolt kind of way.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I got to go home and try that. Excuse me. I'll be right back.
Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to do the opposite, where you're coming down really fast and bouncing out of that movement, because that's going to be stressful to connective tissues and joints and all that good stuff. But so again, that type of training, especially as we age, is probably going to run higher risks of injury, right? So if we're jumping around and throwing weights around, then injury rates tend to go up. And again, because there is an eccentric phase, there's going to be the potential for more inflammation. So I kind of made this my mission about 10 years ago to create equipment that would be concentric only, where you couldn't out-accelerate the weight, meaning there was no momentum involved, because momentum is also volatile. right? And if we have momentum, then we're kind of cheating the weight. And if you're an Olympic weightlifter, that's fine. That's kind of what you do. But since we're not all Olympic weightlifters, and that functionally doesn't always translate to our daily lives, the concept of having a consistent resistance through an entire range of motion without a mechanical sticking point or failure point is where we get into isokinetics. And so that's the solution. The solution for both of those modalities, high-intensity interval training and explosive powerlifting, comes through isokinetic movement. And then there's a subdivision of that as well.
So isokinetic doesn't sound like something. So explain that, because that doesn't sound like an acceleration to me.
Yeah, so isokinetics basically means same speed. So I'll give you an example, a medical example. So a lot of our equipment has an isokinetic mode where, say, in a therapy environment, you want to control the speed of the movement. So you can set a given RPM or, RPM for this example, let's say a bicycle. And so you're on a bicycle and your therapist wants you to be at 40 RPM, 40 revolutions per minute. If you try to go 41 revolutions per minute, the machine will clamp down and hold you to that 40. So everything you do that tries to surpass 40 RPM gets pushed back at you in terms of resistance, and so you end up producing more power. So it's somewhat custom to the user, but it's based on a preset ceiling.
Wow.
And that has its place. Again, very valid in the therapy world. The problem is that if you try to put that into, say, a class format or something moving in real time where different people are different or an individual has different strengths and weaknesses throughout a given range of motion, then we're going to have to adjust that ceiling on the fly manually in order to accommodate that. So that doesn't quite work. So now enter adaptive isokinetics. And this is what we've harnessed in our system, which is using water for resistance. We can now be at any speed we want and have it be constant for the user. So that way, Deborah, you and I and an 80-year-old guy and a 20-year-old guy, all four of us could be side by side, ostensibly doing exactly the same thing, but we're all going to be at our own individual peak power. And that's a rarity.
So the idea then is that the user goes to their peak and tries to surpass that 40 RPMs, but the harder they push,
the harder it pushes back.
The harder it pushes back, so they will get stronger and stronger at any one particular RPM?
That's correct. That's correct. And the beauty of that is that the machine adapts to the user and not the other way around. And there's very few machines that actually do that.
Mm-hmm. And so your machine, tell us a little bit about your machine, because I have a question as how it's different from some others.
What exercises can you do on your machines?
So we have 6 pieces in our FitSpan protocol. FitSpan is the name of our new entity, which we're launching nationally. FitspanStudios.com. There's my plug. Yeah, so we have 6 machines. We have a rowing machine, of course, the best rowing machine in the world. And then we have a climbing machine.
Climbing? So you're upright with
your upright and climbing.
Hands and
correct.
Arms
hands
engaged
and legs working together.
diagonally, probably.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Contralateral, yeah. So we have a climbing machine. We have an upper body ergometer, which is like a big arm crank, like a bicycle for your upper body.
And Concept 2 has, which we've referred to, has something like that now too, right?
Concept 2 has a strength apparatus that has 3 movements in one. It's a leg press, a press, and a upright seated row.
Okay. Oh, okay. I thought it was upright seated row. But I thought they have a pull down ski.
Oh, they have a ski erg as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have one of those also.
Yeah, anyway,
Yeah, so we have our rower, we have a climber, we have an upper body ergometer, we have a ski erg, we have a squat press machine, which is absolutely unique. And as the name implies, it's a squat and an overhead press, but done safely. And then we have our cube, which is a lifting device which mimics the deadlift, high pull, Olympic style movements. And that actually was the genesis of this entire thing. Was I created that in response to a strength training clinic that I taught for All-American Rowing about 10 years ago, where the college coaches were saying that a lot of their athletes were getting injured in the gym doing Olympic style movements in preparation for rowing. And that didn't make any sense because you're getting hurt training for another sport. So I made it my mission to create a way to do deadlifts and high pulls without injuring the athlete. And that's how this whole thing started.
And the way your machines wises up to somebody's own different varying inputs is because it uses
Water. Yeah.
So didn't the original rowing machines before the Concept 2 use water?
They didn't. They were called gamuts, and they actually used a giant heavy concrete flywheel that spun, and then it had a shoe brake on it, and then there was a little plate that hung from a cable, and you would put weights in the plate, and then that would create the brake force on the turning concrete flywheel. And there's a famous story about my buddy Steve breaking one of those. So he figured out how to cheat the machine because if you hit the front end hard enough, it would unweight the plates and then it would release the brake. But anyway, yeah. Now, there are other water devices, water rowing machines. The difference between theirs and ours is that those are a fixed blade design and with a fixed amount of water in the tank.
That's what I was
Whereas
wondering.
we have 2 tanks internally that we can adjust to create different loads based on the amount of water that transfers from the inner tank to the outer tank and vice versa.
Well, tell us about, I want to hear about all these machines, but tell us about the squat press machine. I'm
Sure.
really interested in that.
Yeah, that sounds like the hardest one.
I need to practice my squats, and I'm not at a very high weight. Let's say I could do 35 pounds a few times with a front squat. How could I use that machine and improve?
So it's glad you asked that because typically when we're looking at big movements like that, especially overhead pressing movements, we're going to be dealing with issues of shoulder mobility and thoracic mobility. And so people's range of motion when it comes to shoulder mobility and the ability to extend our thoracic spine has to do with how we align that weight relative to the rest of our body. So if my arms are fully extended overhead, I should be basically intersecting my ears. And most people can't do that. Most people don't have that kind of flexibility, say, in past their now 45s. Right?
What does it look like instead if they're not intersecting your
They're
ears?
forward. They're in front of their ears. Exactly like that. So they're not getting to full extension. That comes from either the shoulder range of motion or as we age, more often than not, it comes from kyphosis. Right. So if we have a kyphotic forward contracture of the thoracic spine, it's very hard to get into that complete vertical position.
Right. Just speaking about kyphosis, I was noticing recently that I have uneven ground at my house. This is totally a diversion. And I spend a lot of time walking around looking down. And I've decided I'd rather that's not a good thing. I mean, I don't want to get kyphosis. And that's the dowager's hump kind of thing that our readers may be familiar with, older people and their heads sort of slowly bend forward. But I think I can feel an improvement in my sense of posture if I walk around looking up, which is also a nicer view, frankly, than looking for cat shit as I'm walking around the property. And, I have to put a little more caution into my awareness of my balance, which is another good thing. It's better not to look down while you're walking.
Yeah.
That's my belief for the day.
That reminds me of, do you remember Bill Bradley, the former, is it Bill Bradley, the former basketball player turned congressman, and he got Parkinson's, I think. I think we talked about this before, but they use this now in low light therapeutic environments for Parkinson's. Is that, looking up, looking out, having a sight line that's 10 to 12 feet out in front of you is much better for fall prevention because if you get myopic and you're looking straight down at the ground, you're probably going to fall more often.
Yeah, so it wasn't a total diversion. It's a
right.
Anyway, but
Yeah.
I understand that what you're saying about the overhead press, which is...
Yeah, so with our machine then, we can accommodate those limited ranges of motion depending on how you're interfacing with the machine. If you're facing the machine, it actually allows you to extend without getting into painful ranges of motion. And then as you improve, you can turn around and do the same movement, but it will push you into extension because of the position of the arc relative to where your body is. So it works for everybody. It can push you and increase your range of motion, or it can accommodate limited ranges of motion as you seek to improve.
Boy, I think an important part of healthy aging is maintaining shoulder range of motion, and
Definitely.
it is. I see so many people who have a rotator cuff injury, and you need to 100% recover from that one way or another.
Yeah.
Well, in oncology, one of the things that I'm concerned about is insulin resistance. And one of the things that happens with insulin resistance right away is loss of quadriceps strength. And I'm not sure we understand exactly why that is, but I certainly would like to push back against that with squat training. And so tell us a little bit about how your machine, it's the same machine for the overhead press and the squat. Tell us how that works and how someone can use your machine to improve their squat and overall lower compartment strength.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of those machines do very similar things. I mean, the rowing movement is basically a big deadlift high pull just in a horizontal plane versus a vertical plane. And then the climber is very quad dominant. And then the squat press, of course, very quad dominant. Or co-contraction, you're getting glutes and hamstrings as well. So yeah, there's a bunch of machines that will get the quads involved, but I think sort of holistically, overall metabolic health from connected muscular functional movements, so where you're not necessarily isolating a muscle group like the quads, but you're incorporating them into more compound movements, actually has more metabolic bang for your buck, which I think would have more positive effects for insulin sensitivity.
Well, sure, but tell us how the squat works on your machine.
Yeah. Well, so you have a yoke and it sits across your shoulders, much like a yoke in weightlifting. And then you descend into a squat position. Now, as you're descending into that position, there's no load at all. And this is what makes this so much safer. So there's no eccentric load, and in this case, what's called an axial eccentric load.
I'm already feeling happy about this.
Yeah, right?
Just thinking about it.
Yeah, because if you're lowering down with a load under you, the potential for injury goes way up because you're having to control that load and then stop that load and then turn that load around. So in this case, you have no eccentric load. So you get into your start position and you only have resistance once you start the drive phase. And so then you press out of your squat and then continue that motion by pressing up overhead. And you're taking that yoke, it has handles on it, and you're pushing that yoke up overhead. So you're continuing that resistance movement.
Okay, so you're kind of doing a thruster.
Exactly. I was going to say that. So a thruster is an old school machine, doesn't exist anymore, but it's really common in football. And this is very similar to a thruster. But again, the weight doesn't come back at you like a thruster would. And
if you find that you're failing in the middle of your press up, you just stop and the weight doesn't fall.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, you can get to the very top. My partner, my business partner, David, is fond of saying that when you do this movement and you get to the very top, you could hold that with one nice at the overhead position and have no problem with it at all.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow, this is fascinating, and I'm trying to think of ways to incorporate that principle if I am far from a FitSpan studio, which I probably am not that far from one. Do you have one locally?
We are opening. Thank you. We're opening our flagship location in Medford in the fall.
Okay,
yeah.
But until that time, or if I don't want to drive to Medford, I'm thinking like when people do resistance bands, doesn't that? I mean, it doesn't at all do the proper guided muscle training that this machine does, but it's a brilliant concept to try and think of incorporating into as much as possible what we do otherwise.
So some examples of how to do really good accelerative concentric work would be things like ropes, doing the rope drill. Another really good one is using slam balls. So take a medicine ball that doesn't bounce, right? So a slam ball. And so if I took a medicine ball, for instance, and I held it in front of my chest and I squatted down and then I drove up as fast as I could and I threw that ball as far as I could, that would be the same thing as our squat press.
Oh, how fun.
The main difference being you don't want to be on the receiving end of that wherever it lands.
No, you just have to walk to where it landed, turn around, and then go toss it back to where you were before.
Yeah, so that would be a good example of that.
Oh, that's now I have to go get one of those balls.
Yeah, and if you picked up a slam ball from the ground in sort of a sumo deadlift position and then lifted it overhead and then slammed it back down on the ground, that would be another example.
Okay.
Yeah.
A good example, yeah. And it seems like then a properly done on the water rowing stroke is a good way to do that too.
Yeah, and that, getting into the power component. So rowing being a power endurance sport, we get the best of both worlds. We get all of the high intensity interval training and the powerlifting style or the Olympic lifting style movements in the rowing motion. So the different energy systems, this gets back to our 15-second on, 45-second off. The different energy systems utilized are such that at peak power in any movement, but we'll use rowing as an example, you're only good for about 12 seconds or so. Mm-hmm. And so, roughly speaking, whether it's an on-off phase or a cycling phase that's continuous, you're going to be good from anywhere from 7 to 14 seconds. And so that just happens to coincide with a racing start in rowing, right? And in strength training, again, it tends to coincide with about 7 repetitions. You're going to peak right around the 5th repetition, and then it's going to start to fall off. But 99% of people are going to be thoroughly taxed by that 7th rep.
Can I ask you another little detail about HIIT training?
Yep.
I was encouraged at some point when I'm coaching people from afar and telling them to go work with somebody like you or a coach to really do it, that for older people, that the 1545 or in the old days Tabatas, which I think was 2010, something like that, the older you get, the longer recovery you need. And I was encouraging people, if it takes you a full minute and a half to recover, for instance, I'd rather have you do 2 good sets of those 15 seconds than do a lesser one the second time because you haven't fully recovered. But you tell me a different perspective on that, perhaps.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Typically, the science behind the work-to-rest ratios are completely dependent on the volume and the intensity of the work. So typically, the higher the intensity of the work, the greater the ratio of rest. So for instance, if let's say you're doing a 10-second all out, and then you had a 50-second rest, well, that's a 5-to-1 ratio, right? If you did a 15-second and then 45 seconds, then that's a 3-to-1 ratio. So changing the ratio of work to rest can accommodate that. But if you have an adaptive isokinetic, then that kind of goes out the window. It's not as important because you're only pushing as hard as you can. You're not dealing with a fixed weight that could overwhelm you. Yeah, so it really solves some of those problems. And because it's all concentric, you're not dealing with the inflammatory response as well. And that's a big part of recovery, is that you're dealing with the inflammatory responses, which chemically can last 48 to 72 hours.
Okay. And if somebody is dealing with a less enlightened resistance system, like, if I'm doing this on the erg now, it still makes some sense to recover enough so that my next high intensity is a good high intensity.
It is. Absolutely. So the quality of the work is paramount, and everything else should revolve around that. If you get, and I'm glad you brought that up because I preach the same principles, is that if you get into a fixed work-rest ratio recovery and you start to get overwhelmed, either because the weight's too heavy or you've done too many reps or it's just cumulative overload, then the quality of the work will suffer and you're not getting the stimulus and response relationship that you're actually going for. So everything suffers because of it.
And you're probably more apt to injure yourself just by inattention.
That's correct. Yeah. So it's a lose-lose.
So your system obviates that need to, it allows people to do a fixed interval and do it in a group of people even because their machine's going to accommodate to them.
That's correct.
Yeah. Wow. So this is the flagship opening in Medford, and then you're going to have it in every gym across the country, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got Medford. We're working on a building down in Emeryville, down in the Bay Area, and then another one in Connecticut. So those will be, I think, our first
Ashland
3.
isn't on your list?
Well, we've already got the Ashland gym, so we have all these toys in my place already.
You have them in Ashland.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Medford shop has them too. But the Fitspan Studio will be a formatted group class gym. So it'll be everything, this equipment specifically, and then these protocols specifically.
But you do have the equipment in your current 2 gyms, one in Medford and one in Ashland.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, that's good news. I was disappointed. I heard Medford. I can go to Medford, but now I don't have to. I
You don't
guess.
have to, yeah. Because I have seen water resistance in some of your machines for quite a time in Ashland.
Yeah, exactly. I developed this about 10 years ago. So.
Work in progress, and now it's at its...
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Congratulations.
Thank you very
So when
much.
people come to the FitSpan studio, will they be in a class?
Yes.
Will they be one-on-one coaching? How does this look like when I show up for my workout?
Yeah, it's really cool. It's 24 pieces, so you get 24 people in a class, but you're rotating through on 10-minute centers, 8 people at a time. So
Now there's only 6 different machines, though.
correct.
So there's 4 of each of them. Or?
there are 4 of each of them. Yeah.
Okay.
And so you'll have teams of 4. So you get to meet new people and integrate with them, and then there's the social component, the community component. There's a memory component. We throw in some
Wait a
memory
minute.
tricks.
Memory. Talk about that.
So in our protocol, we do some simple things. We have a sequence of numbers and letters that's different every day that you have to remember and then repeat at the end of the workout. And then we also have some balance activities during the transitions between the work.
That's great.
So yeah, it's hitting all the things we want to hit.
That's fantastic. And you have all of these things now already in your Ashland and Medford without the class component.
Without the class component. But we utilize a few different protocols so people can try out different things. But the FitSpan protocol has been really exciting to use with our existing members, and they're enjoying it.
Because it's a journey through all those machines, not just the ones that you're most comfortable or familiar with.
Yeah, and it's in the format is basically 4 minutes on, and within those 4 minutes, you have 4 sessions of 45 seconds and 15 seconds.
And you can do that because the machine adapts. If I'm
That's right.
tuckering out, it'll make it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're having a bad day, you just go at whatever pace you want to go, and if you're having a great day, you attack it. So,
And it'll
accommodate.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You stay on one machine for all 4? Or
Yes.
do you rotate?
No, you stay on the machine for the full 4 minutes, and then you rotate. And within the minute transition phase, you do some group activities, balance and memory-based motor skills.
So how long does a workout take?
30 minutes.
That's it.
Exactly. So you're in and out, and then it runs on 10-minute centers. So you can schedule appointments every 10 minutes. Rather than if it's running on a half hour or an hour and you miss the class, you've got to wait.
Oh, so you have a class starting, and then 10 minutes later you have another class starting.
Yeah, you're transitioning in 8 people at a time.
This is this is a good business model as well as a good athletic model.
Yeah. Are you going to be franchising it?
We are.
Excellent.
It is.
Excellent.
So,
Excellent.
yeah. You can check it out. It's fitspanstudios.com. So you can check it out online.
And so one of the other things that's great about the rowing itself is you get to be outside, you can do the aerobic component. So this is really a highly specific and safe and theoretically sound way to do the resistance part of a workout.
And the aerobic.
And, well, not the long, steady state stuff.
No, this is going to be your high-intensity interval training.
High-intensity aerobic, right,
Yeah.
as opposed, which I sort of think of as anaerobic-aerobic combo.
It is.
Yeah. But, there's a benefit to going for a walk in the hills for 20 minutes or rowing out on the lake,
Absolutely.
which is a whole different, yeah.
Yeah, and plus you're outdoors and sunshine and involvement with your environment.
Yeah, I would imagine, just because of the scientist that you are, that you have done some measurements of before and after, a 1 month series of classes that people do. And in general, you're recommending people do them, like I always think of resistance exercise, I do 2, maybe 3 days a week, not more.
So that's, of course, that's a dogma as well. And that just depends on how much time is needed for recovery. But a lot of that recovery time is dependent on the eccentric phase of the movement, because that's really what you're recovering from. So I'll give you an example. So I can't name the team, but there's a pro basketball team that uses my system. And the argument that they made to their general manager when they purchased the system for their athletes is that if they've got a game on a Wednesday night, they can use this system on a Thursday night, and then they can play another game on Friday night with no repercussions. So your delayed onset muscle soreness is non-existent. Your recovery time is much faster, and you can maintain a higher quality of work and a higher volume of work with less, if not any, inflammatory response.
Have you done any specific studies measuring people's progress in the weights they can lift? Like, does the machine tell me how many pounds I just lifted?
Yeah, so all power is measured in watts. That's the universal measurement of power. So we do have monitors, but I can tell you that we don't use them in the FitSpan protocol. And the reason we don't do that is we don't really want to get into the competitive mentality where people are looking over their shoulder at what somebody else is doing. There is that sort of internal competitive part. But the downside to that is that if you're having a weekday, you don't want to be
a wimp.
You don't want to be seeing it, or you don't want to be overworking because you're trying to match some predetermined number. So we're actually just going on feel.
But in terms of, so the basketball team had a really good argument to their managers, but for, I think scientific purposes, I'm just wondering too, like, have you measured strength improvements or aerobic capacity and those kind of things?
Yeah, so I can tell you one specific example. We did this with offensive linemen, NFL linemen, and we put them on the same machine that you were asking about, the power press. We put them on a power press so that we could measure peak power and wattage. And those numbers were terrifying, by the way. But yeah, so when we get into motor unit recruitment and rate coding, there is this adaptation, of course, which is your body figures out how to maximize your power output, which is how to efficiently balance the strength and the acceleration components, which creates a more powerful athlete. So
for a person just coming into your studio out at the community, how many times a week do they come?
We have some folks that come every day. We have a lot of our medical, people that are, depending on what they're recovering from, whether it's like a TBI or even MS, something with a super high inflammatory response, they might do very short bouts. And some folks will even come in twice a day because they're doing very low volume, very low intensity. So more sessions in the beginning is better for them. As people get stronger, they may split their routines so they could still come in 4 or 5 times a week, but they're not going to do the same thing every time. So there's a bunch of different ways to set that up.
Yeah. Tell me again the name of this heavy ball that I've got to go buy to throw across.
Slam balls?
A slam ball.
Yeah.
That's different from a medicine ball?
It can be. So a lot of medicine balls bounce, and you don't want a ball coming back at you. So the slam balls just go thud when they hit the ground. So that's the key differentiator.
They're more like sandbags.
Yeah,
exactly. They're balls with sand in it.
It's good to think of. There's some things somebody can do to try and introduce themselves, or I'm speaking personally, introduce myself to this concept and see what the effect would be of doing something like this for a while. Because obviously tossing the slam ball across the garage is only doing one part of one of your machines, right? Yeah. And your system is 6 machines?
6 machines, yeah. And I'll add to that, Deborah, what you said about the testing. We have a FitSpan score that every member does every quarter. So we can measure range of motion. We talked about that thoracic extension and shoulder mobility.
So important.
We measure strength and strength endurance. Yeah, so you're going to have some markers, and we'll record all of that, and then we retest every 3 months.
Tell us, I want to know who should come to see you. And you're going to say everyone, but are there people who might be thinking, this isn't, this is too much for me. I couldn't possibly do this, that might be surprised if you call them out and say, you could. So, maybe thinking of some people who have come without identifying anyone, of course, but who have some unusual or difficult health situations that might benefit.
Well, I think that, as we discussed, it's whereas it used to be the entry point was 55, now it's really 45, and so we're targeting folks that are 45 and over, folks that have not exercised before, or folks that have exercised all their lives and maybe are tired of getting injured, or they're just not recovering as fast from their workouts based on whatever the workout style is. So it's just a more accommodating type of activity. It's a smarter way to train. It's a healthier way to train. It allows people to be at their peak power, whatever that is, and there's no judgment there, and that's kind of the beauty of it, and get stronger.
And I recall that your gym has some unusual hours.
My gym, well, the Ashland gym is 24 hours a day.
That's unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I see folks in the morning, but we're actually full up. We're not. Yeah, we're not really seeing new people these days. But
That's great.
But yeah, and I think the Medford gym has regular gym hours. But yeah.
So it seems to me that one of the beneficial opportunities with a system like this would be to work with somebody, this maybe what you were getting at Don, who is seriously recovering from some kind of physical injury, or thinking of some of my patients who really need both of these examples of people maybe really need specialized individual attention.
I'm thinking of cancer patients who need to have metabolic rehabilitation.
Yeah.
They are not processing glucose, lipids, inflammatory flares properly, and need to change that. And exercise is
Don, that's
way.
awesome. One of your patients is one of our biggest FitSpan advocates. So
I send a lot of patients to you, so I don't know who that is.
Well,
but
he's our poster boy. He's amazing, and he does FitSpan every day.
Wow.
So I don't want to say his name on the show because I don't want to embarrass him or get sued or something. I don't know. But yeah, no, I agree. It's a safe modality.
But I'm thinking of people who really need one-on-one guidance. Can somebody get a solo session, like a patient with dementia who would maybe just walk away from a class, something like that? Is there an opportunity for individual?
Not in the FitSpan environment. That's a group class thing, and it's pretty. It's running on 10-minute centers.
That's great.
But certainly, in our facilities, Baxter Fitness, Medford, Baxter Fitness, Ashland, I mean, that's what we do day in, day out. So, yeah.
Hold somebody's hand
Absolutely.
if they need. Okay,
yeah,
great.
we're hands-on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrific. Wow.
Yeah. That was a lot.
This is exciting. I mean, it's a great concept. And, I think ideally somebody could actually try one of your studios. But secondarily, we can all think about if we're going to be careful with ourselves exercising, I mean, and avoid injury so that we can keep exercising. It's not the weight we're lifting. It's how we put that weight down, where we are setting ourselves up for injury if we're not paying attention to our posture, stress level, all kinds of things like that.
Yeah, well put.
So I think there's a message to take away for everybody, and I can't wait to try your studio.
Cool. Thank you very much.
So, Andy, as we close, I want to invite you to tell people where they can get in touch with you, where they can find out more, and if they're interested, what their next step should be with you.
So we'll be opening our flagship location in Medford on McAndrews, actually right next to the See's Candy Store. How good is that? And we're planning to open in the fall. And so you can go to fitspanstudios.com. That's just the general website, but we'll have the local website up running soon.
Sounds great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Don, I'll see you next week. And Andy, maybe we'll see you I'm sure I'll see you before then, but maybe see you in the fall at FitSpan.
That would be wonderful. I appreciate it.
Okay. Have a good week.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe. Your simple click is not abstract. It's not anonymous. To us, it's very, very real. It helps us reach more patients and physicians to challenge the old ways of thinking about health and to keep these evidence-based conversations going. Hitting that subscribe button actually makes a huge, huge difference, and thank you.
You have been listening to the Lemanne Gordon podcast, where docs talk shop.
For podcast transcripts, episode notes and links, and more, please visit the podcast website at
docstalkshop.com.
Happy eavesdropping.
Everything presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is established or implied. If you have a health or a medical concern, see a qualified professional promptly.
We make no warranty as to the accuracy, adequacy, validity, reliability, or completeness of the information presented in this podcast or found on the podcast website.
We accept no liability for loss or damage of any kind resulting from your use of the podcast or the information presented therein. Your use of any information presented in this podcast is at your own risk.
Again, if you have any medical concerns, see your own provider or another qualified health professional promptly.
You must not take any action based on information in this podcast without first consulting your own qualified medical professional. Everything on this podcast, including music, dialogue, and ideas, is copyrighted by Docs Talk Shop.
Docs Talk Shop is recorded at Freeman Sound Studio in Ashland, Oregon.